Hello everybody, it is The Spice Must Flow, and today I am going to talk about the French election. As I'm doing this video, it is early Saturday morning in the Central Time Zone, from my perspective, and tomorrow the French people are going to do what is probably the most important election of their lives. This election will probably determine the future of France. And I'm an American. Um, I'm distanced from this, right? Because I don't live in France, and I also don't speak French. Okay, but I've been trying to analyze what's going on over there, and it will be interesting to see what happens. Here's the thing, right? I guess you could say that a big, huge thing of analyzing what happened with the election in America was that with Donald Trump here in America, you had the situation of looking at consensus. Okay, myself, I don't believe that conspiracies exist per se, in the sense of like a bunch of men in smoke-filled rooms, making decisions for society and how they're going to do things and cackling wildly while they, make plans. What I think happens, though, is I think people come to a consensus. They come to a consensus about the future, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, how it's going to work, that sort of thing, right? And I believe that social media has given us an amazing power to look at the sentiments offered by people and then look into the consensus that are formed around the opinions expressed. Okay, and you can do this into looking into certain subgroups, subgroups, certain subcultures, I guess would be the word I'm looking for there. And you can see what they're thinking. You can see what they feel and what they believe. A critical thing to remember is that with Trump, I thought there was a very good chance he was going to win it when nobody in the American media thought he was going to win it, and I believe that's because they were in their own echo chamber. They were in their echo chamber that was largely based around the coast, largely based around cities. They saw him ridiculous as a ridiculous character and thought there's no way that he had a chance of winning. Because they were so far removed from so much of the country, that's why he won. Now, America does have an electoral college based upon the number of congressional seats in any given state, combined with 2 votes from that state, which are a matter of the senators, right? So that means that states that have a larger population don't get as much power in any individual vote as the states with a lower population. We did this as a compromise in this country. We set up the Electoral College that way to try to give smaller states skin in the game, okay? But we didn't want to negate the power of larger population states in their entirety. And Trump did not win the election, but the reason why, on a popular level, he did not. But the reason why he did not is because California voted against Trump about 3-1. Okay. California is so far against Trump, not only that, but it's so far different from much of the rest of the United States that it's almost a country unto itself. Just culturally and a lot of different levels, it's a very different place from the rest of the United States. Because I've grown up in the United States, because I've been following politics in the United States, I have an extensive idea. I can look at websites that are popular amongst people of the left and get an idea of their consensus. I can look at websites popular amongst the right, get an idea of their consensus. Okay, and I can't do that with the French election. I really can't, because I don't get the idioms, I don't get the culture, and I don't know the language, right? Even if I did know the language in a basic sense, I wouldn't get all of the little subtle cues. But what I do know is that the French media is polling Macron, the opponent to Marine Le Pen, as about 20 points higher as of this Saturday, as of Saturday morning. Okay. But the question you have to ask is that correct? Is it true, right? You know, in the election in the United States, they were polling what should have been a blowout against Trump, both in terms of the popular vote as well as in the Electoral College. And it didn't happen. So what's actually going on in France? Also, another question you have to ask, I know a lot of people would say, this is crazy, there's no way they would do this, but are the French going to give Marine Le Pen an honest shake in terms of the counting of the vote? Okay, there's this old joke, I guess you could call it. Yeah, I mean, it was serious when he said it. It's kind of become a joke to say it now, but you know, Stalin always said that the people who vote determine nothing, the people who count the votes determine everything. Well, you know, if you're willing to do vote fraud, I look at what is going on there. I also have looked at Macron has said that not just Marine Le Pen, not just the Front National, okay, but the people who support the Front National, he has directly attacked the voters, and he's done his own version of Hillary's basket of deplorables statement. He said that they are not French, and that the Front National is voting against France. Well, you know, you look at the electorate, you probably, even let's say that there's 20 points ahead. That would imply that 30% of France is not French. You know, no, of course they are French. Right? You could make a much better argument that the people who are not of French descent and who are Muslims living in the Banlieues are the non-French people. They just simply imported those guys to vote for them, you know. The real question is, what will the turnout be, of course? Because normally they vote for socialist candidates, and they don't have a socialist candidate to vote for right now. So will they be able to get those folks who are the descendants of Algerians, Tunisians, that sort of thing, will they be able to get them to vote in sufficient numbers? It's hard to say. But where I was going to go with this, where I was going to go with the whole idea of consensus and their election and what's going on in France, and can we believe the numbers that are coming out of France? And can I throw a prediction? The only prediction I can really throw out at this time is I suspect Le Pen loses, but I suspect she loses by 3-4% at basically at worst. Okay, I think it'll be a very close election there, and I do not believe you can believe the French media. A lot of the reason why you can't is if you simply look at who owns them, and you also look at the state of censorship in France, and they have censorship. There's no denying it. They have hate speech laws. They have various things you can't say. In fact, part of why you hear this propaganda of, oh, well, the Front National, they are racist. They're a racist party. We really can't know exactly what the Front National believes in their heart of hearts. And the reason why we can't know what they believe in their heart of hearts is because they really aren't allowed to say it. So if they are, in fact, radical Nazis, they can't say it or else they would go to jail. At the very least, they would be paying penalties, like paying fines, for saying, you know, things that the French government looks at as things you can't say. So, you know, we don't exactly know. We have an idea of what they say. And they claim that they are not fascists. They claim that any members that once were have been kicked out, and now the party is, you know, simply all about the culture, you know, cultural front sort of thing, right? And you actually have, I've seen videos of people who are with Front National trying to hand out pamphlets to black people with French citizenship, like as in black French people, right? Saying no, we're that they freak out, they run the other way, they're horrified, they're like, this is a Nazi. They're not, I would bet that there might be like one black guy in France that votes for Marine Le Pen, but but it's pretty clear that it is not a strictly white identity party or something of that nature. Um, we can look at the issues, okay? And I would say that the real reason why the establishment in France is very worried right now is because Marine Le Pen wants to do three things which would cut the establishment off at the knees. First of all, she wants to end the euro. And when I say that, I mean she wants to end France being in the Eurozone, but France leaving the Eurozone would mean the end of the euro, okay? The Eurozone cannot exist as a coherent entity without France and France's economy involved in it. So if they were to end that, they basically would be, the Eurozone would be done. The European Union would be done if she were able to make that happen, okay? Even if she were able to get an office and their legislature was able to block that, it would still throw all of this stuff into serious doubt. Okay, the second thing that she wants to do is she wants to block immigration to France. Basically, any and all further immigration to France, more or less. Certainly all Muslim immigration into France. Well, think about that for a moment. I mean, all of Europe lately has been under this idea that they need to bring in Muslims, more and more and more. Okay, and you hear a variety of theories thrown out on why they need to do that. Okay, and I've heard everything from, it's the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan, which basically assumes this sinister plan to eliminate white people, and I hear that from some folks that are alt-right and stuff, all the way to just simply the idea that this is about votes. Get these folks in, they don't have much of anything, they're going to go on welfare, and they'll be compelled to vote for the socialist candidate pretty much every time around. I like to say, what you really, in order to get an idea, what you really need to do is you need to go onto French social media, you need to talk to the folks that are on the left, and you need to get the idea of their consensus online. Right? You need to get an idea of their consensus by going to the French version of town halls. They'll tell you, and I can tell you that if it's anything at all like the English-speaking world, which I am pretty well in tune with, what it amounts to is this: there isn't something as sinister in the idea of as the Kalergi, Coudenhove-Kalergi plan, but what it is this: you have a fairly overt vote buying scheme that is tacitly admitted by the left, combined with a good amount of white guilt on the part of people that are on the left, right? But they don't actually believe it isn't exactly some sort of plan, as in a conspiracy sort of thing where they plan on, like, eliminating the white people or something of that nature. That isn't how rank and file people on the left have it. They do believe, for the most part, if you look at them, this is the English-speaking world, but I suspect the French-speaking world is probably very similar on this. They feel a good amount of guilt over colonialism and things of that nature, but they're not, shifted all the way to, some sort of alt-right idea of white genocide. That isn't where the left is at, per se. There are a few crazies out on the left who are pretty much there, but for the most part, it is actually a rather openly admitted idea of just simply getting as many votes as possible. And I'm pretty sure that that's exactly what's going on with the French. What about the center right? France's center right is not really a right wing like anything that an American would acknowledge or as a right wing. And Macron is a very great example of that because he sounds like somebody to the left of Obama. If you really look at his stuff, he does, and it's this weird combination of globalism and handing power in various forms to international business interests and banking interests, combined with creating and sustaining further and further social programs and taxes. Okay, that's economically untenable in any way whatsoever in the long run, but it's pretty clear that they don't think about the long run. Okay, so Le Pen is called far right, but if you look at the stances of the Front National, it becomes very clear that they are not far right in any way that could be understood by anyone who is in the Anglosphere, who's in the English-speaking world with that tradition, right? Because we have more of a liberal economic approach. And the Front National is anything but liberal on an economic level, right? Interesting thing about this election coming into it, and I don't know how this is going to shake out, you know, in terms of the long run. I did look at the maps in there because they have a runoff system where all the candidates run the two candidates with the highest percentage will go on to a second runoff election between each other if no one in the first round gets over 50% of the vote, which is exactly what happened here. Here's the interesting thing about that. Eastern France went heavily Le Pen. Western France went largely Macron. Okay. You start looking at the demographics of that, and I'm not just talking about the demographics of race per se. I'm talking about the demographics of what sort of people live in these parts of France. Some things begin to become very, very obvious. And what becomes very obvious is this. The same dynamic that was at play in the American election of a poor white base that is separated from a wealthier urban white base, okay, of people who economically are having problems and are older, making an alliance with younger people in more urban areas as well as in their own, you know, the fewer descendants that they had, making kind of an alliance where you have these people who were affected by diversity kind of doing them, not being a very good thing for them, combining with these folks who have been kind of screwed in the globalism approach. Kind of make an alliance. And on the other side of it, you have these other people, and the truth is I would suspect that if you were to do social media studies the way that you saw on the US election, you probably would see that there are two bubbles, that the two sides live in totally different worlds in terms of what they access, what they think, what they believe, what's going on, etc. I've also seen some of the protests in France. And footage from it makes the Antifa stuff that happened in America look tame in comparison, right? It does. The Antifa there is insane. They have amazing amounts of power, huge amounts of people. They clearly have a very solid infrastructure, if you will, to get done what they want to get done. Doesn't exist that way in America, right? And a lot of these folks that are appearing on the French Antifa videos, I am pretty convinced that if the French had access to weaponry the way that Americans do, they would have already tried to kill Le Pen directly. Okay, they would have already attempted an assassination of Le Pen. Now, for all we know, actually, there has been an assassination. It just hasn't been made public. But the French left wing is far more extensive and powerful than the American far left wing. So that's another interesting factor to put in to all of this. And as I said, the Muslims have tended to vote for socialists. They tend to vote for the left, anywhere from left to far left. Will they vote for Macron? Will they come out to vote, right? Because if they don't show up, if they can't get any of those Muslims to show up, or at least not a very large number, Le Pen actually will win this. And my prediction that she'll lose, but she isn't going to lose by 20%. She'll lose by 3-4%. That's that would be proven false. I don't know exactly what happened. When I said that this is probably the most important French election, what I mean by that is these forces that I've described that have a consensus, these folks that are all about globalism, they're all about multiculturalism, they're all about bringing in immigrants, whether there's any ability to assimilate them or not, right? In fact, actually, they have no interest in assimilating them. If you assimilate them, they might not block vote for you anymore, right? So the left actually has never wanted assimilation of any population that comes in, and the left in no Western country ever wants assimilation. That's not something they're interested in. They even fool themselves into believing, for instance, that Muslims have common value with gay atheists who are like trans unicorns and shit. I mean, like, they actually believe this stuff. It's kind of hilarious if it wasn't really serious. But that's kind of the thing we have to look at in all of this. I'm looking at what is going on with this election in France, and when I say it's the most important election, what I mean is that Macron potentially could do exactly what Merkel has done. He could simply open the floodgates to whatever Muslim wants to enter, or whatever other person who's not a Muslim. You have to realize, especially as we go into this summer, there's a very good chance, especially based upon the demographic situation in Africa, and not only that, but several European countries actually opening immigration offices in the third world, that you could have boatloads. You could have literally 1 million people from the Middle East and Africa enter a European country overnight. Okay. If a couple of million people enter France, for instance, because Macron got it to happen, and he is able to rubber stamp it through, right? Doesn't really matter what the native French want at that point. These people can get voting rights in France. It's kind of done. It's a done deal, basically. It doesn't matter what you think. You're going to get outvoted every single time by people that simply will be directed, hey, just put your check mark next to that name, right? The socialist politicians wouldn't have to worry anymore. And I know a lot of people would say, well, yeah, but he's not a socialist. Well, that's kind of the thing I've noticed, okay? The French right, the French center-right, has the same delusions that the American Republican Party has, that, if they kowtow to immigrants, those immigrants will vote for them. I'm like, well, unless you're willing to offer more in benefits to the new, supposedly new French people, right? That you brought in, no, you're not. This is all a deal. Okay, like I realize it's kind of been, I guess you could say, talked about. You see this footage of an African man who runs up to a camera held by a media guy, and he just starts yelling money, 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 and then runs off, right? And he's incredibly happy to be in Europe, because he's like, I am going to get money. I'm going to get a place to stay. This is the land of plenty. I am going to be not having to really worry about, anything now that I'm in this wonderful place, right? And yes, you've seen people, especially on the right, grab that footage because, it's this guy. You could say, well, that's just that one guy. And maybe when he says money, he means he'll have a productive job that does blah, blah, blah. That isn't really, okay. First of all, you're delusional if you think that's what he meant when he yelled money, money, money. No, that isn't what he meant. He meant, I'm going to the place with the welfare state. Okay, I am in like Flint right now. That's what he meant. And you could say, well, that's just one guy. Don't worry about it. But it's not just one guy. Most of the immigrants that they're going to be getting from the Middle East and from Africa are going to be a net drain socially in terms of their social programs and their tax dollars. It's arguable, it's highly arguable that their children of any of these guys are ever going to make anything. I would argue that actually the socialist governments don't really want them to ever make anything of themselves, right? Because, as I said, then they might not block vote for the socialists. You know, and then there is the cultural stuff, okay? There are those issues, okay? So this is the most important election probably in French history, okay? Because after this election, if Macron wins, one of three things are going to happen. Okay, France will be inundated with migrants at a time where their birth rates are low. They will be swamped, and they will cease to exist. Right? France will cease to exist. It won't happen immediately. It'll happen over the next 100 years, but France won't exist anymore. Okay, and in all likelihood, due to the government that they have, it never will come back in any form whatsoever. That's possibility one. Possibility two is this. The French will freak out, okay, as the violence gets so bad, as the attacks get so bad, as the stresses to their social system get so bad, that there will arise an actually legitimately far-right leadership. And that leadership will say, oh, let's kill these people, right? And France will have a civil war. I say civil war, but I mean, it won't, there'll be nothing civil about it. That's the other point. And that would likely lead to a bloodletting of millions. Probably, it wouldn't happen overnight. It would take a few years, but it would eventually happen. Okay, and then the third possibility is this. And that is that Macron is not able to get through exactly what he wants. But there's just enough stuff to piss off just enough people that they get one more election. That's the least likely option. Okay. This is in all likelihood, this is it. This is the crux. This is basically where where the French people have to do or die. So I hope they select Le Pen, because she frankly is the candidate that is least likely to lead France into a situation where they're at war in another few years. And I know a lot of people would say, well, how are you going to come up with all this stuff? You admitted that you don't speak French, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And it's very simple. It's very simple. I cracked the code a long time ago. Diversity is not a strength, right? It isn't. You put divergent groups together in the same area, and they have nothing in common. There's not some strong force pulling them together in one way or another. There's nothing that will make them overcome their differences. They're going to fight. And a lot of people are going to die. It's happened over and over and over again. It was the first red pill I ever had to swallow. It's pretty rare to have that actually work. So, at any rate, though, I'm going to sign off with you guys. This is The Spice Flows, and as always, furthermore, I consider Islam must be destroyed.